Hey guys, thanks for coming here. We're so glad. If you guys are here for the Global Opportunities for Theologians and Expositors one, that's the right one. The beauty and the art one is over there. But I'd love to pray us in, and then we'll have Paul take it away so we don't miss much time. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to come here to DTS, to WEC Week, and to hear more about your heart for the nations and the opportunities that are there. God, would you continue to shape and form our hearts? Yeah, we commit this time to you. Would you cause fruit through it? In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's give it up for Paul.
Well, thank you, Noah. We had a couple of technical problems, but Noah resolved it for us, so very thankful for that. My name is Paul Barreca. I am the Executive Director of Fellowship International Mission. FIM is a mission-sending organization. We have missionaries in 31 countries. My interest in missions stemmed from my pastoral ministry. I served as a pastor for 33 years, and I felt very obligated, very committed to not just supporting missionaries, but to using my abilities, my teaching gifts, and to share that with the global community. So as a pastor, I would take mission trips. My church would support that, and I would be involved in either teaching or doing pastor leadership, different kinds of things in various countries. That interest resulted in serving on the board of Fellowship International Mission, and that board service ended up allowing me to serve as the executive director. So it's a great privilege to be able to do that. We want to talk this morning about ways in which theologians, expositors, researchers, the kinds of programs, the kinds of training that you're receiving here in seminary, how is that needed? What are the applications on the mission field? And essentially, I want to focus in on two potentials. One is the opportunity of teaching and just serving on a foreign field. Dr. Weaver had the privilege of doing that for many years, served as the academic dean at Word of Life Bible Institute in Hungary, and was teaching there. And of course, there are many, many opportunities for educators, for professors overseas. But the other is kind of what I did as a pastor, using my training and experience to go and serve, usually connected with some of our missionaries from our church. So as we think about the church and maturing church, missions, of course, we want to present the gospel and go to places where, as we've been learning in the plenary sessions, the unreached in the world, places where the gospel is least accessed and least understood. But that's, of course, only a part of the picture because the Great Commission it includes teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. The baptism, kind of the evangelism portion, the teaching preposition there is the training portion. And that involves church planting. And of course, it also involves training of the local leaders. Kind of thinking of Colossians chapter 2, as you receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught. And this theme of didaskalane, teaching is so prevalent throughout the epistles. And of course, that's why you're here, to learn to be an effective communicator of the gospel. So we want to train and we want to develop leaders in the national church, wherever that may be. But how do we do that? For many years, the idea was, well, let's take let's bring the sharpest theologians, the sharpest pastors, and bring them to the U.S., give them, or Europe, bring them in, give them good theological training, and then send them back to develop other new structures in their countries, in their nations, in their regions. And a lot of folks have done that, and some of you are here from similar situations. There is a challenge with that, though, a problem with that. Here's a study, or here's a paper by Anthony Casey. Let me just read the beginning of his abstract. There's been a marked increase in global theological education over the past 15 years, 2022 article. The move by most U.S. seminaries to modular format doctoral programs has allowed for a flourishing of incoming international students. However, roughly half of those students stay in the U.S. after graduation. That's not what we're looking for. And in some ways, that's counterproductive. I'm an advocate of bringing the training to the national church, to the indigenous church, wherever that may be, equipping them to raise up their own leaders, their own trainers, and helping where possible or where needed. And a lot of times in the launch process, that is an important part of that process. So I want to give you just a couple of examples of some of our FIM missionaries who are involved in theological education. The first is David Love. David served as the academic dean of Rio Grande Bible Institute for many years. And right now, his primary mission is mobilizing Latino students to serve in Middle Eastern countries. Got a fantastic ministry. David is in and out of Afghanistan. He left Afghanistan 5 days before the fall of Kabul. If you remember the scenes of, airplanes and, the crowds and all of that disaster. So David certainly has quite a story to tell. Here's his testimony encouraging theological training overseas.
Hello, fellow theological students at Dallas Seminary. I got my THM there years ago in the 90s, went on to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. I've been in theological education my whole life. I was the academic dean at Rio Grande Bible College. Now I go to different parts of the world that have great and urgent needs for you men and women to come and to teach them biblically and theologically. So please consider coming out with us. The church is exploding. I go to Central Asia. Next week I'm going to Turkey, then over to a restricted access country. And these men and women are starving for God's word. They want to be taught, and you can do it. So I'm so excited that your generation is raising up. So Dr. Paul, let him have it. Nice to talk to you.
David's a great friend and a great brother. His video reminds me that even someone from a U.S. Bible college or an associate's degree would probably be on the mission field one of the most theologically trained individuals in many situations. And there is a great need and a great hunger from our brothers and sisters. Another FIM missionary with DTS connections is John Brenneman. And John has been serving the Lord in Sweden for the past 40 years. Now, tremendous difference, talking about, places like Afghanistan and Central Asia where David's been. Here, Sweden, of course, very modern, industrialized country, a place where the Reformation certainly had a stronghold and a place that considers itself a Christian nation, like they actually talk about. We are a Christian nation, and yet there's very, very little Christianity. So John has dedicated his life to ministering to the church and to the seminaries, and there's a very, very small number of them in Sweden. His video is a little bit quieter, so we'll have to it's only about a minute long, but we'll listen to that, and hopefully you'll be able to hear the audio.
Hi, my name is John Brenneman. I am serving with Fellowship International Mission. I've been serving in Sweden as a missionary for the past 46 years. My call to the ministry began at the Urbana Missionary Convention in 1967 while I was a student at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. It was there that I made a commitment to go and serve Jesus Christ anywhere in the world. That eventually took me to Dallas Seminary, where I had a desire to learn the scriptures and to learn how to communicate the scriptures. When I moved to Sweden, I felt my studies at Dallas Seminary had prepared me very well for teaching in a seminary and teaching in Bible school and for preaching assignments in different churches in Sweden. That was my THM at Dallas that prepared me to do that. But while in Sweden, I began doing my studies in the DMin program at Dallas Seminary, and that has equipped me for doing counseling and marriage ministry. I now have, for the past 35 years, been doing preparation for marriage seminars, have been teaching counseling seminars and teaching counseling at a Bible school in Sweden, and have also been doing seminars in churches, both in counseling and in marriage ministry throughout the country. So I feel my years of study at Dallas Seminary has equipped me very well for serving in the church in Sweden and serving in Bible schools and giving me the opportunity to minister to people in various contexts. And I'm very thankful for the preparation that I had for going into missionary service.
Very good. A little summary. You probably didn't catch all of it. THM at Dallas Theological Seminary, Dean in Biblical Counseling, and a ministry in Sweden. And I've been with John in Sweden. John teaches at 4 different Bible schools, really all of the Bible schools in Sweden. And in Sweden, John would be the preeminent biblical counselor. You know, that he's training the few. So in Sweden, there are probably about 50 to 60 students studying biblical counseling in the entire country. And John is teaching all of them, writing books. He co-wrote a book with a Swedish woman on singlehood, single adult woman. Her and John together wrote this book, and it's being used. He's done a lot of work in providing materials for biblical premarital counseling in the Swedish church. So just a wonderful brother being used of the Lord. And John's an example of one who was really kind of honed in on a narrow area of theology and ministry, practical ministry, and is using that for the Lord. I'd like to ask Paul Weaver, Dr. Weaver, if he'd come as well. I know you know Dr. Weaver as professor here in Bible exposition, but he also has a very exciting ministry overseas that he'd like to share with us. So go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. I recognize a few faces on the board here as well as in the classroom here that I've had before. So those that have had me in the classroom know that my wife and I served in the country of Hungary. I was there for a total of 8. I was a missionary for 18 years full time. And I graduated Dallas Theological Seminary with my THM in 2003, August of 2003. And then I was in Hungary in September 2003. So as it's been mentioned already, right away, you can have a day one after graduating, even before graduating, you can join me and teach overseas with me. But from day one, you can have a significant impact. And there's needs all over the world that would covet your help. So I was a single missionary for the first 4 years. And then the Lord said, I've been patient long enough and provide me with a wonderful wife. And Jill, who's here with me, we're both from Columbus, Indiana. So we dated, and over the course of one of the furloughs, we're from the same home church in Columbus, Indiana. And so this is a younger version of us going back to Hungary. So 4 years single missionary in Hungary, 9 years additionally as missionaries together. Then I served with Word of Life Global Bible Institute. So in upstate New York, I was the academic dean of the main campus, but also the 10 international teaching sites around the world. So continued to teach internationally. But for those geographically challenged, as I was before I went to Hungary, Hungary's right there in Central Europe, incredibly significant location as it relates to training Czechs and Slovaks and Hungarians and Romanians and Ukrainians. And so we had students from all over that whole region of the world. My last year, I directed the Bible Institute for the last 8 years there in Hungary. And the last year when we left, we had 79 students from 17 different countries. And so my wife and I could go and plant a church in Hungary, and we'd do an okay job. But we felt with the gifts that God had given us and the equipping he'd given us, we could be effective training Hungarians, Czechs, Slovakians, Romanians, those who will never struggle learning a language, never struggle learning their culture, but would have more impact, more effectiveness than Jill and I would ever be. So fully believe in training nationals to do the work of the ministry, and they can do it so effectively. Well, you might like to know we have a 78-acre castle property in the country of Hungary that when communism fell, this property was used to teach communist philosophy and atheism to children. And now it's used to share the gospel each summer. About 1,000 young people, Hungarians, come there and hear the gospel. If you know Adam and Annie Jakob, they were on staff there. They were students of mine in Hungary. Adam's now a student here as THM. And then from September to May, it's a traditional 2-year accredited Bible Institute. And now our director there is a graduate here, Stephen Bramer, Dr. Bramer's son, Joshua Bramer, is directing the Bible Institute there. So this was the last year that we were there in 2015, 2016. This was the student body. And so it's a joy to see them, many of them already very engaged in ministry, directing camps and teaching and pastors, and just the joy that brings to see former students serving roles that I once served in and continue to and beyond. So then, as I mentioned, for me, a total of 9 years or 13 years in Hungary, 9 married together, then another 5 years in upstate New York with the Word of Life. The main campus is there. And then, so there I was the academic dean of the main campus in New York, but also the black stars are the global Bible Institute locations, so accredited ones. The red stars are the non-accredited ones, less formalized, but we were working at getting each of these campuses accredited year by year, going to those locations, helping them get their standards up to the point where our accrediting bodies here in the United States would approve them as a teaching site. So that was what I did for the last 5 years with Word of Life, then and continue to teach probably 4 or 5 times internationally at those locations. So so that was what we did before Dallas Seminary invited us down here to be in the Bible Exposition department. And we've been here for about 3.5 years and love teaching in the Bible X department, love to share with my students as well the opportunities globally to take what they're learning in the classroom and to implement it. But I'm also serving on the board of another school called the National Theological College and Graduate School, and really thankful. I'm a volunteer professor for them, a volunteer board member, don't get paid anything. In fact, I continue to raise funds for these trips. And FIM is my mission board. So I'm an associate missionary with them, and thankful that they have this category. Not all mission agencies have a category like this, where now at Dallas Seminary, I don't need to raise funds for my salary, but I still need to raise funds for travel expenses to the field. And so thankful to partner with Fellowship International Mission, who've been a great partner and great support for me. And so National Theological College and Graduate Seminary is primarily Westerners that are teaching in the Middle East and in Uganda. And so we have 3 campuses: Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, and 1 in Uganda. And it started in the Middle East to train Middle Easterners. And so those with terminal degrees, PhDs, DMins, EDDs, go in and teach a modular format where they can come for a week, study God's Word in accredited school, but we partner with ministries on site so that we don't have to buy buildings and maintain buildings. And so the greatest amount of our resources can go to scholarships, help students come and study. And so they come for a week. Actually, I'm going in 3 weeks to Egypt to teach a Life of Christ course there. And these students, about 20 Arabic speaking students, will be coming. They'll be staying from 7:30 in the morning till 9 p.m. at night, taking me for 27 hours and taking another professor for 27 hours. And they are loving it and can't get enough of it. And we still play soccer one night till midnight during the week. So. But what a joy it is to invest in these future leaders in a part of the world that I would not be effective doing this full-time there. And so I love that. So we have 3 levels actually. So we go in and are teaching with terminal degrees, teaching master's level students. And in Egypt and Uganda now, those master's level graduates are teaching the Bible colleges that have been started there in Uganda and Egypt. And even then, those master's graduates and some of the bachelor's graduates too are also doing non-traditional education. So going to in Uganda to places where they don't have even a high school degree. And so non-traditional, so not accredited. So our master's degrees and bachelor's degrees are accredited through the accrediting bodies in that region of the world. But then our graduates are even going out and training in non-accredited scenarios, but same content, same quality of training as far as Bible and theology, but these are students that don't have a credentials. And so, but they're pastors, right? They're missionaries, they're teachers, and they need training as well. So several layers and levels and opportunities, formal training and non-formal. And so you can be a part of that. I do take students with me. This was in Egypt 2 years ago, it was in Jordan last year, and going back to Egypt this year. These were my students and my translator there on the left. Sherry's her name. And then I still teach with Word of Life internationally. This is in Uganda. I took Sam Allen, was my intern 2 years ago. I gave him 1 hour to teach of the 10-hour course I was teaching. These are the students from Uganda all over Eastern Africa. Then Michael Banks went with me to South Korea. Former students here, graduated with his THM. Now he's going to be a missionary in Philippines, I believe. Then last summer went to Argentina. This is my intern went with me there, John Herbert. He's still a student here as well. I gave him 2 hours to teach. So I love to take students with me and expose you to the opportunities and give you an opportunity to teach one of the hours and see the needs overseas. So if you're interested in teaching trips, please come see me, or internships as well. So
Thank you, Paul. And Paul, when you have students, they raise funds for their travel expenses, is that how that? Okay, yeah, very good. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So I do want to introduce one other FIM missionary to you. This is a full-time missionary, kind of in the traditional missionary role. It is Dr. Dennis Shelley. For, I believe, about 40 years. Dennis will share his testimony, but for about 40 years, Dennis served at the ECWA Theological Seminary in Kagoro and an additional seminary there, also an ECWA seminary. ECWA is the churches that were established by Sudan Interior Missions in the 60s and 70s, became independent and established their own Nigerian denomination called ECWA. And on any given Sunday, there are 10 million Nigerian believers in ECWA churches. They have a number of schools throughout the country. And most of them, they're run by Nigerians, but Dennis is one of an American faculty members that gave of his resources and time. So Dennis, share with us a little bit about how the Lord called you to Nigeria as a young seminarian, and then over those years, how the Lord used your teaching in building and establishing seminaries and churches throughout Nigeria.
Well, good day down there in Dallas today. I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We thank God for the opportunities to go and serve overseas. I was always interested in missions, but in my senior year at Washington Bible College, our president had his eyes on me and thought that I could do a good job teaching. There were two things I thought I never would want to do: teach and preach. And those are the things I've enjoyed the most over the years. So I went one summer to Nigeria, a small Bible college in southern Nigeria, Bible and Missionary Theological College, and went back 2 more semesters and started Capital Bible Seminary for my THM. Between those studies, I went back another semester and then joined FIM in 1977. There was no American mission sponsoring or serving in our area, and I was able to join FIM, and that met my need. Many missions will ask you to go to places that they have set already. FIM is very flexible. If God is leading you to a ministry and you don't have a mission to back you up, FIM is a very good potential ministry that you could potentially join. So after seminary, I went back to BMTC for some years. The Lord led my wife and me to get married in 1988, have 2 missionary children at Ikwa, where we served. And then in 2007, we went to Ekwa Seminary at Kagoro, where I am still representing them from this side as a missions advocate. I think for you who are listening and attending this seminar today, you have some great opportunities. May I encourage you while you're still at school, pick up what Dr. Weaver said, or work as a possibility to go as an intern with FIM, or maybe even to go with a ministry for a summer or a Christmas break or for some weeks. Because as you get over there, you'll be seeing, is this for me or not? And I believe God can use anything that you have experienced in your training, whether it's farming, whether it's learning computers, whether it's sewing or crocheting or working as a carpenter or a welder. Those things can help you along with your theological teaching to make a real impact and even help some of the nationals in different ways. For our seminary right now, we're seeing one of the important areas for students who are going out to ministries where there are Muslims dominated villages or areas. If they have a trade or a skill, they can go in much better, support themselves a little, identify with the people, and God can use that. So even at our seminary, I did my doctoral studies after Capital Bible Seminary at the Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in intercultural studies or missions. And right now, our seminary, I left 2020, they would love to have a PhD holder or even a master's degree holder interested in missions coming to train and help their programs. They're up to the PhD level in expository preaching, also in a ministry that is trying to help for Christians to be in politics and policy making and to make an impact, because in Nigeria, many of the leaders are Muslims and many of the policies are not going in favor of the Christians. A lot of persecution, a lot of our people have had kidnappings and other villages burned and relatives killed, and many challenges to stand strong for the Lord. But for you, I believe this could be a great opportunity to be praying about, and you might have an opportunity to go there, even to teach a couple weeks like Dr. Weaver goes. This would be a great opportunity, and our people would be too happy to have you come. So these are a couple of things that might help you. I also hope, as you are thinking, if you're married, that God will help your wife to be fully committed to missions too. We've seen some fellas get excited, but their wife is not, and they never really made it to the ministry and the field. So even for your children, these are opportunities. Our two children, they were born in Nigeria. They are very good third culture kids. And our son is back at Lancaster Bible College as the director of discipleship and also leadership. So God has some places for you and your children. They get stretched. I think they can interact with people very well because they've been connected with people in different cultures, and especially even if they know a language or they can do well. Our son did well in soccer. That helped him at Lancaster Bible College, and he still kicks the ball and has a really good contact that way. So these are some things that might help you a little.
Thank you so much, Dennis. We'll have time for a Q&A for either Dr. Weaver or Dr. Shelley as well. I'd like to share just a little bit of my experience because I'm coming from, of course, Dennis and Dr. Weaver as well. They served full-time overseas, meaning they had to raise support. And this is the real challenge as you're thinking about perhaps your calling and vocation. Go to a U.S. church, teach at a U.S. Bible school or a U.S. seminary, and you walk away with a paycheck. It's usually not a big one, but it can pay the bills and feed the kids and all of that. But if the Lord's calling you overseas into a seminary, Bible school, or teaching role, then that usually involves the services of a missionary agency and going out and doing that as a missionary. That's the whole daunting world of support raising and all of those things. And I can tell you that as challenging as that is on a daily basis, not only FIM, but the other organizations that you see out there at Bailey, on a daily basis, we're seeing God provide for the needs of people. And the question is really one of calling. Is this something to which God has called you? And I just want to encourage all of us as stewards of theological resources. What Paul says to Timothy, the things that have been entrusted to you, the same commit to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. You have a heritage, you have a trust, you have a blessing that's coming. You know that. On a daily basis, you get to hear just incredible lessons, and you're being guided in your studies by men and women who have dedicated their lives to the study of Scripture. It's fantastic. What Paul said about pastors sitting for 14 hours. This is true. I was in India last year, and they said, "Oh, you're going to teach." I landed on a Saturday. Talked to my friend Suresh. "Oh, happy to have you." And of course, no sleep. Walking off a plane at 7 in the morning. You haven't slept in about 24 hours, really. And now you're going to start your day. And Saturday morning he says, "Oh, and one day you're going to be teaching 12 hours for the pastors." "Oh, great. Thank you, Suresh. I didn't know that." So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, if I have 12 hours with a group of pastors that have no theological training, what am I going to teach them? Inductive Bible study methods. I'm going to teach them how to study the Bible. I'm going to give them tools and worksheets so that they can study the Bible. And at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, these guys are sitting there in a room. Maybe like 5 or 6 of these tables here is the size of the room. 95 degrees, a couple of fans going, super hot. They're sitting there in their buttoned-up shirts with their pen and their notebook and listening, and taught through the morning, and then taught through the afternoon. And then got to about 6 o'clock, and they took a break for dinner. And they said, "Dr. Bareka, we know you're tired. We're going to let you go." And they let me go. And then they stayed and worshiped for 2 hours. They are just so hungry, because this was, for most of these guys, this was the first time they had a seminarian, someone who had spent time in the Word, studying the Word. That was the first time they had a training at that level. And they sat and listened. And I want to tell you something. For 12 hours, there wasn't a guy that fell asleep. I almost fell asleep talking, but not one of those guys fell asleep. And they took all of those notes. And then you know what they did? They went back to Gujarat State, where they were from, and they retaught the workshop. So just the fruitfulness and the abundance is just truly amazing. So here's just some experiences here. A place that, of course, Dr. Weaver knows very well, very well, Word of Life Philippines. This was my first connection to international teaching, was through the academic dean, John Fogel, who happened to be my Sunday school teacher when I was a junior high kid in Screw Lake, New York. And John said, "Hey, Pastor Paul, come on out and teach at the Bible Institute." So I went and taught, and that opened up other doors as well. This was about a year ago there at the Bible Institute. Our church in New Jersey took a great interest in that. And so I asked my church, as a part of my remuneration, I said, I want to teach at least once a year in an overseas Bible school. And the church funded that. And sometimes I would take work teams with me. And that, to me, these kinds of, it really is a question of stewardship of gifts, right? I'm teaching in the U.S., I'm a pastor, but I want to be a good steward of the gifts and the resources that God's given me. And I chose to do that. Word of Life was a frequent place. Here's the Bible Institute in Hungary that Paul was talking about. I teach there every year as well. God's provided an open door to be able to do that, teaching the book of Psalms there. This is the ECWA Theological Seminary in Kogoro that Dr. Shelley was speaking of. The Lord used Dennis here also to establish something. You might have heard him mention the Skills Acquisition Center. One of the problems they found with the Nigerian pastors, they must be bivocational. Their churches cannot support them. And so one of the problems was that the pastors would come to seminary, they would get trained, they would go back to their village, but then they'd have to go and harvest fields. in some other place, and they would have to leave their home, and the churches would suffer, the churches would struggle. And so at seminary, they're also training the pastors not only in theology and Bible, but also giving them a skill such as welding, farming, agriculture. Dennis is from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and so he brought Lancaster County farmers and technicians and welders and bringing those guys up, and they had just this amazing fish hatchery, and they used aquaponics and all kinds of modern technique. Rabbitry, they have rabbit houses, and think, what are rabbit houses doing in a seminary? But then those pastors have skills and have a workable income when they get back to their communities. Did a wonderful job there. Here's Word of Life Bible Institute in Uganda. Also, you saw some pictures there from Paul and the classroom there. And here's the next one I want to show you is also in Uganda, but this is not a formal seminary or a formal school. This is an outreach of one of our missionaries in the mountain villages on the western side of the country, bordering with the Democratic Republic of Congo, and bringing pastors down from the mountains to Kasese, to the main city. And these pastors, these pastors have no theological training, but our missionary had kind of launched this program, and he brings U.S. pastors in about 3 times a year to teach these guys in a modular setting. And again, with a Bible college degree, you would be, well capable, and your skills and your teaching would be much appreciated. But here's just a little bit of that. Don't you just want to be there? Like, isn't that amazing? So I sent this video to my wife. It was on a Saturday. I think she got it on a Saturday night. She wasn't with me on this trip. And I said, honey, you got to listen to this worship. And this guy, this Ugandan pastor, I've forgotten his name. He's a wonderful, he is as delightful in a conversation as he is there. And he's got this whistle, And Kim went to church the next morning. And we were at a small church, and the worship team was meeting. The piano player wasn't there, and the guitar player wasn't there. And the worship team is like, oh no, what are we going to do? And Kim says, guys, come here. And she plays that little video. And she said, this guy's got a whistle. And they went, oh yeah. Change your perspective right away. But these kind of places, to be a pastor and to travel and to teach and to input into these places. And why is that so very important? Because if we don't do it, someone else will. And the theology that they will get will not be word-centered expositional theology. The prosperity gospel is prevalent. One of the situations that happens, to give you an example, in India, one of our missionaries in India was sharing with me that they go into villages, and many times most of the village, they respond to the gospel, and they'll be in the village, and they'll do an evangelistic campaign, and they'll be there for a week. And at the end of the week, they'll have a number of believers, and they'll get the men together, and they'll say, okay, guys, we're going to come back in 2 months, but for now, we need one of you to lead the church for the next couple of months. Who can read? Okay, you're the pastor. And often what happens is these believers, they're there, they love the Lord, they want to grow, but all they have is their phone, and they turn on TBN, and that's the model of Christianity that they get. And so in India, you have you have people in mountain villages, remote villages, and they'll get saved, and the leader will go and buy a suit and start tapping people on the head because that's all they know, because that's all that they've seen of Christianity. We have to do this. We have to be there to give word-centered teaching. I want to leave you with just 3 potential strategies in order to do that and to steward your gifts and service for the Lord and for the global church. One is career missions and the idea of church planting, but so often, and this is what Paul, you and Jill could have planted a church in Hungary, Czech Republic, in any of those countries, but national leaders can do that so much more effectively. They have such a higher level of credibility, and what they really need is they really need the theological training. And so going as a career missionary, yes, church planting, evangelism, but as you're thinking of your exposition skills and theology skills, perhaps in the area of one of these many, many seminaries, Bible schools throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, throughout Asia. Another is in your ministry, either now as a student or in the future in a pastoral or other teaching ministry, to do short-term trips. If your church can fund that, great, just do it through your church. If you can self-fund that, great, just do it yourself. If you need an agency like FIM to be able to help, to be the conduit for you to raise the funds, then yes, we're happy to help in that way as well. And the other is either through associate or adjunct faculty connecting to some of these schools. I suggest that the best place to start is with the missionaries in your home church. Contact, get in touch, say, hey, I'd like to do this, but I don't know, where do I go, Paul? Where would you send me? Start with the missionaries that are in your home church. Ask if there are teaching opportunities. Ask if there are ways in which you can use your teaching to help them in their ministries, and follow and pursue those leads. Some steps. The most important, of course, is prayer. Practically, if it's a short-term trip or a career missions, that involves an application to a mission organization. Organizations like FIM regard ourselves as a service organization for you and your church. Mission agencies do not send missionaries, local churches do. We're there to support you and your church in accomplishing the Great Commission. And again, asking for ideas from missionaries from your church. Covered a lot of ground, but want to just stop and maybe just for some discussion. We have folks online as well that may have some questions. So Noah, maybe you can come back up and help us with that aspect. Let's start here in the classroom physically first. Ideas, discussion, or questions for either Dr. Weaver, Dr. Shelley, myself, or even just to share broadly with one another. Yes, ladies. Yes.
Question, but I know that when you're going to these places, you're often working through a translator. What's your advice for when you're prepping and preparing? Because I know how do you build so that you can have easy to understand concepts? How do you know that language delay? That's just a very practical thing that I'm running into. So
yeah, there's certainly a learning curve with that. In terms of your speaking, and Paul, you can maybe address this as well, but you want to really think through your key phrases, your transitional phrases. You really have to avoid idioms, figures of speech that do not translate. Just all of that. And as you're thinking through your outline, consolidate, shorten, abbreviate. You want things as simple as possible. A lot of it does depend on your translator. I mean, I've taught, and I'll give a sentence, and then the translator goes and gives maybe a little sermon because he's trying to bring something that he knows they need, but I don't know they need, And so you just have to smile, and then when they look at you and start laughing, you realize, yeah, they're talking about me. And that's okay. Paul, anything you want to add to that?
No, everything you said. We don't realize how many idioms we use and figures of speech that don't translate. So you have to think through all those. And I'd say as much preparation as you can in advance, and send that material on to your translator.
Yes.
That's usually helpful. Right now, I'm interacting with my translator in Egypt, and he's asking questions about my notes. What do you mean by this?
Yes. Yeah.
So they're getting it translated into Arabic, but then also it gives opportunity to interact with them so that when I'm on the field, we're working well together.
And I would also say we want to leave them with as much usable material as we can. Yeah, so handouts, thumb drives. I mean, you can buy a thumb drive for $8 or something like that, get those, load them up. And then with Google Translate, most every culture can get that, at least a good bit of the content. Even if it's not officially translated, they can get a good portion of what is there. I'd also encourage you to look at perhaps some of the oral culture resources, such as Good Soil from ABWE. New Tribes has some great material as well. Tree of Life is one of the tools that we use at FIM in oral cultures. A very simple discipleship program based on a lesson that's built around one hand-drawn picture, hand sketch picture, 8 lessons that constitute the 8 primary sessions there. So those are good resources as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that article you mentioned earlier about half of PhD students who are international staying, did it have a statistic for master's students as well?
I didn't read. All I have is the abstract. I just found it yesterday. I'll let you look at it. It's from April 22, and I forget the name of the journal, but we can look it up later. I think that was. I don't think that was specifically PhD. I think that was just postgraduate, which would be masters and PhD. Correct, Paul? That's when we use the word postgrad. We're referring to master's level and above. Yeah. Yeah.
So when international students come and study in the States, does FIM or maybe other organizations you know of have some way to allow them to fundraise here in the US while serving back in their countries?
Yes. Yeah. They in fact, about 40% of FIM missionaries are non-US citizens. We're higher than most organizations because of our paradigm. And it usually is someone who's come to seminary here and is going back. Yeah, so that does happen. And what we love to see with that is that they're usually not going back just as a pastor. They're usually going back into a more regional or networked kind of ministry, such as a Bible school or seminary or discipleship training program. And if they're going to do that, we see value in that. But there is a very, very high, lack of return. And we want to be really, really careful about that. And that's why I'm much more of an advocate of taking the training overseas. Yeah. Yes, 2 questions here.
Thank you so much for your time. I'm coming from India.
Yes.
Figure out. So I had the privilege of going to the mission field myself by God's grace and kind of a little bit understand whatever you're speaking with regards to the mountain tribes and all those people. So my question is, how are we navigating believers who cannot read or write at all? I figured you mentioned a little bit oral rules and all that, but it kind of becomes very difficult. They don't know how to read. They don't know how to. How does that dynamic work out? Did you anytime come across that? How did you navigate?
Yeah, so I'd love to introduce you to Suresh, our guy in Aurangabad. He goes into Gujarat where there's even less. Seems like the further north you get, the more remote it is. And so what they're doing is he has a network of pastor trainers, and they go back frequently every 2 months, and they retrain the pastors. Most of the pastors can read. In fact, that's kind of one of the key things. And I didn't share the rest of that story when they ask, who can read, and the guy raises his hand. They give him a Bible. And then they come back and they meet with him. And they're using oral type of lessons. And so there is in the missiological context, there's a great deal of a large amount of material on communicating the gospel to oral cultures. So we want to be able to do that, but we also want to teach them to read. And so that means that other professionals, other educators from a Christian perspective come in and provide training and sometimes translations as well. So this is, I'm sure you're learning the missiological world is incredibly broad. It's just a very, very expansive network of people serving in areas of proficiency. But yes, initially, the key is frequent meetings and follow up with that pastor to make sure that he's getting good theology. And then I think someone else had a question. Yes.
Yeah. Are the associates, teachers, members, do they choose the venues where they teach, or are they assigned to certain venues?
At FIM, we are driven by the desire and the calling of the missionary. So for us, it's directed, the missionary is the one directing that. We can help with guidance and maybe connecting with areas where we know there are needs, but it's really left up to that individual. And some other organizations and larger organizations like, the IMB, well, they've got a list of, 150 openings, and they'll assign you, they're much more, corporate and structured, and that because they're larger. So it really depends on the organization. Yeah. Yes.
Thinking beyond translation and avoiding idioms, how would you advise aspiring cross-cultural workers going into other cultures to contextualize their material for effective teaching?
Yes, just as Dr. Weaver said, in advance communicating with some known leaders there to look at your material and to have those discussions first. The more that you travel, the more that you encounter various cultures, you begin to become more sensitive. I think of some of the mission trips I took in my early 30s. And I think some of the things I said must have been quite embarrassing. As I think back, I just didn't know, and was just insensitive to some of those things. So it does require humility of spirit. Certainly reading on some of the mission books on contextualization, on just being very sensitive. A Third of Us is one of those really good books. I saw that out in the lobby as well. But communicating with your host in advance, the more advanced work that can be done, that kind of like is an exponential impact on the effectiveness of your ministry. So I hope that helps. Yes, and then Noah will take some questions from online.
There's no questions.
Oh, no questions online. Okay, great. All right. Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious. You all mentioned a little bit about like maybe serving in these missions organizations during like the PhD process while getting your PhD, but
Yeah.
is it important for us to consider too, like during our THM, the possibility of doing some work online and going and serving?
Absolutely. We have, Bible college students that we're sending out in short-term trips. And let me just explain maybe a little bit what that might look like at an organization like FIM. We would have something called a short-term trip, or we call it Mission Explore, which is, 2 weeks, maybe up to a summer. And you would sign up and we would put you in contact with maybe 4 or 5 of our missionaries in areas where you might like to serve. So if it would be in places like seminaries and things like that, you would connect with one of those missionaries and find that place of service, get approved for the application process, raise funds through your churches and network, and then, go and do that ministry under the leadership of that FIM missionary. The other is mission immersion, which is more of an internship. And that would be something very fitting at a THM level, where you're going and you're teaching for a full summer, or you're teaching for a semester, or you're shadowing one of the missionaries there. And that would be a little more, extensive. On a mission immersion type of situation, there can be salary that you draw during that internship if you're able to raise the funds for that. So that could be anywhere from like 4 months up to 2 years but you probably don't want to interrupt your studies that long. But that, there are opportunities like that. And other organizations will have similar kinds of concepts and approaches that they have.
Great. The other question I had, are there any organizations that you're aware of that are doing kind of similar models, but incorporating business into it, like creating, opportunities for locals and doing mission work through that?
The mission leader in business's mission is Crossworld. Crossworld is definitely one that has really, really done that. Avant also has great opportunities. Both Crossworld and Avant are here. I'm good friends with their directors, and yeah, they both would be excellent. But in business's mission, Crossworld has made that's almost their predominant approach in their mission sending. Yeah.
We actually have one now from online.
Yes.
You mentioned the Tree of Life Coloring Bible Studies. Could you please expand on this?
Yes, so the Tree of Life discipleship program is fascinating. It started in India, and then an Indian Indian missionary with the IMB took it to Senegal, West Africa. Here's how it works. You have a cohort, you have a group of people that are doing a discipleship program, and they come together for a Saturday and they learn 4 lessons. Each lesson is built, and starting with creation. So there's a sheet of paper and there's a world and clouds, and I've been told that I can do it, and I draw at about a 3rd grade level. So you just draw this little diagram and you explain it, and on one Saturday you learn those 4 lessons, right? In order to come back next month, you have to teach those 4 lessons to your own group. If you don't teach them to your own group, you cannot learn the next set of lessons. It's really hard. I mean, it's very like high threshold, right? And they are seeing in Western Africa, we have a missionary by the name of Justin Hoy. And if the person there can, if you're listening, if you email me, paul@fim.org, I'll connect you with our people that are doing that. Justin and his group, in a period of 14 years, have seen 19,000 churches planted. And yes, that number is 19,000 churches. It's an explosive format in disciple making. I've not seen anything like it in my background and experience. And but it is built on those lessons. It's not a terribly long program. I think there are, there may be 24 lessons total. I forget the exact number. And it's built with having a trainer, and then there's second level of master trainers that are kind of training the trainers. So, and that's being utilized very effectively right now in India and in Western Africa. Great.
Paul, can I say one word yet?
Yes, Dennis, you can say the last word because we have to go. So,
All right. May I encourage those in the group today not to forget to read some biographies about missionaries. I have one. I'm going to try to work to send one of our copies. It's called "A Drumming to a Different Beat," and it has to do with my walk right up till today. I'll work to see if I can get a copy down to Dr. Weaver for him to put in the library. And also you have a book on discipleship, which has been very helpful too.
That's great. Thanks, Dennis. The word that I want to leave you with, and I've mentioned it several times, is stewardship. Be a good steward of the training and the gifts that God has given. It will be a blessing to the church around the world. And Father, we thank you that these gifts come from you, and that you have entrusted us with the precious truth of the gospel, but also with the truths of understanding and knowing and growing in your word. I pray for these men and women, for those who are online, and for the churches that they represent, and for the many ministry passions that are in there, that remain in their hearts, Lord. Guide them and use them to impact the cause of Christ around the world. Thank you for this time together. We pray for the closing session coming up shortly, that you'd use our brother to again speak to our hearts and illuminate our minds to what is happening around the world in missions. And we'll give you the praise for accomplishing the building of your church in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Can you guys give Dr. Paul a We also have a plenary session after this in the Chafer Chapel, and then there is a lunch following, a commissioning lunch. So go in peace. Yep.
No, I think.
Oh,